Margaret Weller adjusted the gold-framed photograph on the mantel for the third time that morning. In the picture, she stood beside her late husband, Victor, during their 40th wedding anniversary, his hand rigidly clasped around hers, his smile more a grimace than joy. She stepped back, hands folded. The photo didn't need fixing. It was just something to do. The house was too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed in on your ears, made you aware of every breath, every floorboard's creak. At 70, Maggie had mastered the art of dignified solitude. She knew which curtains let in the kindest morning light, which books to reread when the ache of memory clawed too loudly. Yet lately, even the comforts she had curated over decades felt hollow. She sipped her tea. Earl Grey, lukewarm, she didn't bother warming it again. The loss of Victor 2 years ago had not devastated her the way people expected. Theirs had been a marriage of stability, not passion, a slow, respectful partnership where feelings were implied, never voiced. He had been proper, powerful, and proudly distant. Margaret had played her role beside him for decades, the gracious hostess, the silent support. When he passed, the grief was real, but it was for time lost, not love missed. On Tuesdays, Maggie attended yoga. Not for flexibility, her knees had long rebelled, but for motion, for faces, for a pulse of life. That's where she first saw him. Daniel Reyes was unlike anyone she'd met. Young, perhaps 30, maybe less, with sun-kissed skin, dark, hair always tied back, and a laugh that belonged in music. He worked the front desk, guided new members with polite warmth, and seemed to genuinely see the people who most others ignored. The first time he spoke to her, Maggie had been fumbling with the locker code. "Need a rescue, ma'am?" he had asked with a grin that didn't mock. She had chuckled, surprised at how his voice, low, rich, dusted the air between them. "I suppose I do," she replied. "I've never been good with numbers." He leaned in and, without touching her, guided her fingers to the keypad. "There, muscle memory, works better than thought." She laughed again. She hadn't laughed like that in years. That brief moment could have ended there, but Daniel remembered her name the next week, and the one after. He began offering to help her stretch after class, guiding her gently, never crossing boundaries, but always watching, always attentive. Maggie noticed how her breath changed around him, how she stood straighter, smoothed her blouse, reapplied her lipstick before entering the gym. One morning, she chose earrings, small emerald studs, before heading out, and caught herself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't delusional. She was reawakening. But Margaret Weller didn't allow herself foolish fantasies. She'd read enough novels to know how these stories ended, with humiliation, with regret. She had no business allowing a young man to affect her pulse. Still, she noticed. Then came the personal training session. A new promotion at the gym. Daniel offered it to her on the house. Said he'd enjoy working with her. For her health, he said. "You don't have to pretend," she told him. During their first session, her voice calm but wary. "I'm old. That's not a secret." He tilted his head. "You're elegant," he said, as though correcting a factual error. "And health doesn't have an age. Besides, I admire consistency. You show up." She hadn't known what to say to that, so she nodded. And the workouts began. Over the next few weeks, something quiet built between them. Not flirtation, at least not overtly, but a current. His fingers lingered an extra second during posture corrections. He complimented her perfume. He asked about her garden, her books, her memories. He listened. And she, in turn, found herself talking more than she intended. About Victor. About the coldness that had settled between them even before the cancer. About how sometimes the silence in her house was louder than the television could drown. One Thursday afternoon, after a session, Daniel asked if she wanted to join him for a smoothie. Maggie hesitated. "Smoothies," she said dryly. "I'm more of a gin martini woman." Daniel laughed. "Then maybe I should adjust my palate." She didn't go with him, but the invitation lingered in her mind long after she drove home. That night, she stood by her bedroom window, watching the streetlights cast golden lines across the pavement. Somewhere below, life continued in rhythms she'd once known. Dinners, dances, accidental touches that made the air spark. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible, and that was dangerous. Chapter 2. Desire in the Afternoon. Wordy. Count 760. The following week, the weather turned. Spring had been generous, but Tuesday arrived with gray skies and wind sharp enough to rattle the shutters of Maggie's reading room. She stood by the window, a cup of chamomile in hand, watching clouds tumble over each other. She had planned to cancel her session with Daniel, an old ache in her hip, she would say. But when noon came, she dressed carefully, ignoring the protest, in her joints. Daniel met her at the gym with his usual smile, but there was something softer behind his eyes that day. He didn't ask about her stiffness or the light limp in her walk. Instead, he offered his arm. She hesitated a second too long before accepting it. After their stretches and light cardio, Maggie leaned back against the mirrored wall, catching her breath. Rain streaked down the windows in silver ribbons, and the gym had thinned out. Daniel sat beside her, both of them facing the long expanse of empty treadmills. "You ever just want to disappear for a while?" he asked suddenly. She turned to him. "At my age, it often feels like I already have." He glanced at her, frowning. "Not to me." It wasn't a line. His voice didn't reach for charm. He said it plainly, as if stating a fact. Maggie blinked, unsure of where to look. Her throat tightened with an emotion she hadn't expected. Relief. Outside, the storm cracked. A tree branch scratched the side of the building, like fingers dragging along a wall. Daniel stood up, offered his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of here. I know a cafe close by. Nothing fancy, but they've got good lighting and better coffee." She hesitated. The rule, her rule, had always been clear. But the storm offered a kind of excuse, and the quiet in her chest dared her to follow him. The cafe was nearly empty, dimly lit, and smelled of cinnamon and rain-damp wood. Daniel ordered black coffee. Maggie chose a lavender latte. They sat across from each other at a small round table near the window. Her coat was damp at the edges, her hair curling slightly from the moisture. She looked alive. They spoke of small things at first. Books, cities they had never visited, the taste of French butter compared to American. But soon, the conversation deepened. "I was raised by my grandmother," Daniel said. "She was tough. Wore lipstick to take out the trash. Used to tell me that youth was a loan you paid back with gratitude." Maggie smiled. "She sounds like a woman I would have liked." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside her shifted. His gaze wasn't hungry or performative. It was curious, steady, intent. "You remind me of her," he said, and for a moment Maggie stiffened, unsure whether to feel flattered or insulted. But then he added, "Not in age, in power." She walked into a room and people paused. Maggie swallowed. The heat in her latte had cooled, but her palms felt warm. She placed the cup down and leaned back. "You say all the right things, Daniel." He didn't laugh. "I don't try to. That's probably why they're right." Silence stretched. Between them, not awkward but dense, like the moment before thunder. Then he reached across the table and gently brushed a crumb from her cheek. The contact was so casual, so light, but her skin burned under it. She didn't move. She didn't speak. His hand lingered a second longer than it should have. The moment passed, but the air was changed. By the time he walked her to her car, the rain had stopped. The world outside shimmered with the aftermath of the storm. Wet, asphalt gleaming like obsidian, tree branches glistening with drops like tiny mirrors. She reached for her keys with trembling fingers. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, too quickly. "Yes. Just tired." Daniel didn't press. He opened the car door for her. Before she stepped in, he said, I don't think you're invisible. I think most people just don't know how to look." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Her chest ached with a mix of gratitude and guilt. As she drove home, the streets blurred past in quiet streaks. The radio played a jazz tune she didn't recognize. Her hands gripped the wheel harder than necessary. She kept replaying his words, that crumb on her cheek, his eyes. And underneath it all, a question swelled in the silence between her thoughts. How far had she already gone without admitting it? She didn't have an answer, only the pulse in her wrist, now faster than it had been in years. The affair never announced itself. It didn't arrive with trembling hands or whispered declarations. It slid in quietly, like fog curling under a doorframe, harmless, until you realized the room was full of it. For weeks, Maggie and Daniel existed in a private rhythm. She still went to yoga, still clipped roses from her garden, still said all the right things to her book club friends. But Wednesday afternoons became sacred. Daniel would arrive at her home, always just after lunch, always with a casual grin that said, "Nothing's unusual here." They never discussed what it was between them. That gave it permission to exist without consequence. It wasn't just the touch of his hands or the lips that knew how to slow down time. It was how he asked about her dreams, not her aches. How he looked at her, not as an old woman, not even as a lover, but as someone fully alive. That illusion, Maggie now understood, was addictive. One Wednesday, as Daniel pulled on his shirt after lying beside her in bed, Maggie reached for her phone to silence an incoming call. She noticed something, his reflection in the vanity mirror. He was texting someone, fingers moving quickly, his face serious. He didn't know she was watching. That night, she waited until he left and then checked her security system. She had a motion-activated camera at the gate, one Victor had installed years ago. She never paid much attention to it, but now, curiosity pricked at her. She opened the app. There he was, walking away down the driveway, pausing to take another call. The audio was faint, but the words, though muffled, were enough. "She's loaded, man, I'm telling you. Couple more weeks." Maggie froze. The silence that followed wasn't external. It bloomed inside her chest like ice spreading across a still lake. She listened again. The voice was unmistakably Daniel's. That light, playful edge was gone. He sounded businesslike, strategic. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, something inside her had hardened, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She hadn't been chosen. She'd been targeted. On Friday, she made dinner. She dressed deliberately. Pearl earrings, soft silk, perfume Victor used to like. Her movements were precise, as if she were performing a role she'd long ago perfected. When Daniel arrived, he noticed. "Well, this is fancy," he said, stepping inside, flashing that same crooked smile. Maggie smiled back. "Felt like cooking. You're always feeding me protein shakes and guilt. Tonight, we eat like people who remember butter." He laughed and followed her to the dining room. The table was already set. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight and fractured it. A bottle of red breathed near the breadbasket. They ate. They talked. He flirted. She played along. Then, halfway through the second glass of wine, she asked lightly, "Who were you talking to the other night? At the gate?" Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head. "You stopped to make a call. I have cameras, you know?" He faltered. Right. Yeah, just a buddy, talking about work." "Interesting," she said, her voice soft, "because I heard something about me being loaded and needing a couple more weeks." The room went still. The only sound was the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Maggie, he began, but she held up her hand. "Don't lie again. Not now." He looked down. When he spoke, his voice had lost all its smoothness. "It started like that, okay? I needed the money. I thought maybe I could charm my way into something easier. You looked lonely. I didn't think you'd even notice me." "But I did," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, and I wasn't expecting that." There was a long pause. Then Maggie stood. She walked to the cabinet, pulled out a manila envelope, and laid it on the table. "What's that?" he asked. "Your rent. 3 months' worth. Paid directly to your landlord. You'll find the receipts inside." He opened it, looked stunned. "I'm not cruel, Daniel," she said. "But we're done. This chapter ends here." He stood, mouth open, wanting to explain. But nothing came. She walked him to the door. He lingered. "I did care about you, in the end." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then let that be enough." Weeks passed. The house felt bigger now, not emptier, just honest. She didn't fill it with music or flowers anymore. Instead, she let it be what it was. Hers. Entirely hers. One morning, while shopping downtown, she saw Daniel again. He was across the street laughing with a woman his age. He didn't see her. Maggie turned, walked the other way, the wind brushing her cheek like a secret. She didn't need him to see her. She saw herself clearly now.